It sounds to me, and we hear this with this podcast a lot, which is one of the things I think is so cool, is there's just people put on this earth with a bend toward animals and understanding animals and communicating with them. That sounds like you, but what I really want to get into is the horse thing first, because that's something I don't understand very well. And it seems to me a lot of times we run into dog trainers who have that, the background with horses, and there's so many parallels to working with those animals versus working with dogs. Can you get into that a little bit?
Oh yeah. To me, working with a horse and working with a dog, the basics are all the same. There's little nuances, differences, but with a horse, you can't manhandle a horse very well. A horse is going to weigh significantly more than a person. Whereas a dog, if you've got a dog on a lead, you can kind of hold them there physically. And so I think you can kind of ignore some of the body language that goes on with the dogs in that kind of scenario. But with a horse or a larger animal, you have to really read their body language and communicate with them effectively. And I think it leads you down kind of a different line where you are more aware of cues and your body language and how that animal is responding to your body language. Rick asked me, I don't know, years ago, how I developed my demeanor around animals, and it really made me think about it. And I came back with the answer that you can't buffalo a 2,000-pound bull. You have to work with him. You can't just bully your way to get the behavior that you want. So I think that respect and that understanding for how that animal is going to react and how they think really helps any trainer in the bird dog world, because you're still working with a lot of the same nuances. And one of the things that always comes to my mind is as you're working horses, one of the signs that your horse has learned a lesson and has kind of processed through something is they'll swallow or lick their lips. Even sometimes horses will yawn. You see the same thing with the bird dogs. It's just in a different species. So transitioning from the horses to the dogs to me was almost seamless. I just had to realize that everything that I knew, my background with horses, applied with the dogs as well. And then I think too, as far as cueing an animal and getting a desired response, it's more obvious in the horse world because you're using reins to stop a horse or to turn a horse. There's a set cue to get that behavior, and even to get a horse to move his hind end, you're going to reference a certain point of contact. You're going to bring your leg back to get him to move his hind end over or to move his shoulder over. So that applies to dogs too. So I think I'm very aware of cues with dogs. And Ronnie laughs at me because I do a lot of the same things with the dogs that you do with a horse. Turn them and teach them to spin and back them up, just to work with communication. A cue is just a method of communicating. And once you can communicate with an animal, boy, you can do anything with them.
That's so interesting. And I want to back up to the point you made about, if you're dealing with a full size horse, you're not pushing that sucker around. You're either asking the right questions or it's not going to respond very well. But we can get away with maybe being less in tune or less capable of asking the right questions with a dog, because we can just physically move a dog around, but it's not the best way to go about communicating with them.
Absolutely. And I think since we live with our dog, we have a slightly different relationship with that animal than we do with a horse or a cow that lives out in the barn or lives in the pasture. So I think we get a little blind towards what that dog is really going through and how they're feeling, because we're so used to them just kind of being in the picture but not really paying attention to them. So I think we miss a lot of stuff with the dogs that we could pick up if we just kind of reshaped our relationship with them.
So how do you do that? Do you work with them more?
I don't know if you necessarily have to work with them more, but I think with Ronnie and I, when we're working these dogs, we're always concentrating on having that animal join up with us. And that, again, is an equine term. But it essentially is the time when an animal goes from thinking what they want to do and how to do it, how to accomplish what they want to accomplish, to enthusiastically looking to you as a leader, as the one that's going to kind of determine where the pack goes from there, what we're going to do at this point. And there's a lot of different ways you can get dogs to join up, but that's kind of the beginning of the training for us. Once we get the dogs looking to us for direction, then we can take them anywhere with us.
So there's correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's something you're thinking about with dogs where, because, we live with these creatures and they're at home with us and we view them as such an integral part of our life, but we maybe aren't giving them the right, just because they're there with us doesn't mean we're giving them the right stuff to live the best life and to understand what we're really asking of them.
Yeah, I think it's hard to recognize that, the animal laying next to you when you're watching a movie or reading a book, we get so caught up in the emotion that it feels like a family member, and we identify more with that dog being a member of our family than with it being a canine, a predator, who sees the world differently, who reacts differently than we do. So I think that's kind of an injustice that we, collectively as people tend to fall into inadvertently, because we care for these animals. The blinds kind of get blurred a little bit. And I think if you can step back a little bit and work with those animals, try to get them to join up with you, whether it's 5-minute healing exercise, or we work with agility and obstacles a lot, just to get the dogs thinking and listening. There's a lot of different things that you can do in short sessions that change your relationship with that animal and making things better.
Yeah, it's we just had this experience in my house where we dog sat a dog that's a 2-year-old retriever that it's owned by an older gentleman who, he's kind of looking at this like it's his last dog. He's had Golden his whole life. And this dog is really good bloodlines, field bred, came, solid pedigree, but just hasn't been worked with a whole lot. So it's pretty heavy, and it's fighting for that leadership role constantly. And if you kind of assume that with her, you can see her react immediately and go, "Oh, this dude's in charge. I'll just do, like, what are we doing?" And you see that demeanor change. But from his perspective, and we're all guilty of this, but from his perspective, he's like, "Oh, I have this dog and I'm taking really good care of her because she lays on the couch with me and we hunt pheasants some, and we, she's a part of my life." But that doesn't mean that dog's getting what that dog needs to thrive and use its brain and its body in a way that, like you mentioned, a canine really needs to use it.
One of the things you mentioned there was using its brain the way it needs to. And that's one thing that we see a lot, dogs that come in that, might have some behavioral issues. Maybe the dog is running the household, or maybe has some aggressive issues. If you get that dog, mentally occupied, working on, like I said earlier, we use agility a lot in our workouts. You can just get them thinking. And once they're engaged and thinking, they change, they morph into kind of a different animal that is much more biddable and easier to live with. So just little bitty things like that really make a difference in a dog's life. And my husband's uncle, Delmer Smith, everybody knows who Delmer is, but he always said, you have to teach a dog to learn. And it took a while for Ronnie and I to really figure out what he was saying. With our kids, we don't just throw them into first grade and expect them to excel. When they start in first grade, they've already had a lot of preparation. They have been taught how to learn. They have the foundation. They have the understanding. So when they get into first grade, it's not a big step for us. But we don't always give our dogs that help. We might leave them in the backyard until they're a year old and then take them to a trainer. And it's a completely new environment for the dog, and it's a bigger leap than they can succeed with. So I think if we think about that and keep our dogs engaged and mentally prepare them for life, they can overcome any obstacle that's put in their path. But it takes that preparation, teaching them to learn and setting them up for success. Everything we do with a dog is designed to set them up for success in little bitty increments. So every time we challenge them with something, they can be successful. And everybody, feels good about that.